thank you. Any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. So we move to the minutes of the last meeting. Those of you who were present, do you consider them to be a correct record of that meeting? Okay, no challenges for accuracy, so on we go. Thank you very much. Any matters arising? Okay, thank you. The action log.
This is one for Paul around USA Lakenheath.
So yes, so if I may, so yes, I did look into it. Slight issue that technically it's American soil, so essentially any patient to be treated requires a visa. It makes things very difficult, really. Having said that, there was a really valid point made around clinical, workforce, and I did speak to the trust around recreating those links. So there might be some workforce dividend in terms of works to be able to support the trust directly. So I'm assuming this conversation are taking place, but I will follow it up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good.
We now get the general update, but Ed's still busy with the waterworks. So, Richard, do you want to do one, or shall we invite Ed between two other sessions?
He's just texted me to ask if I can do it, so I'll try my best.
Okay, thank you.
I wasn't entirely sure what was on his list, so I'll make my own list up. So first off, just in terms of the ongoing transition work, as colleagues know, moving from the clinical commissioning groups to the new integrated board structure from the 1st of April. As you're aware, we've got a comprehensive programme of work underway. We submitted our first decisions map and other documentation through to NHS England a couple of weeks ago, and we were the only ICS in the region to be RAG rated green, which hopefully is an indication of some confidence from NHS England in terms of the progress we're making on that. There is a kind of a formulaic structure to how we put these things forward into NHS England. So I think there's a massive checklist effectively of the things that we need to be working on, which is where we've been RAG rated green, which is good news. We've submitted our first set of proposals around what the Integrated Care Board membership would look like. There are some prerequisites already within the guidance if the legislation is passed around that. For instance, there needs to be more non-executive members than executive members, so not dissimilar to the current CCG board setup. There's also importantly partner members as part of the new governance, so secondary care, acute care, mental health, primary care, etc., etc. So we're just working through the mechanics of what that would look like, but that's good news so far. You'll know that we've appointed the ICB chair has been appointed, Dr. William Pope, and the interviews for the ICB chief executive have concluded, and we're waiting for a final decision from the national team of NHS England, but we're expecting hopefully that announcement to be made fairly imminently, and we'll obviously let you all know as in advance if possible of the outcome of that piece of work. Moving on to vaccinations, and I'm sure colleagues will update later in the agenda as appropriate. Continues to be a major focus, as you can imagine, and many of you are involved in our work, both operationally and strategically. We've got the vaccination board across the ICS, but much of the work is obviously happening on the ground. Particular thanks to Kate and you all who have been involved in that, because it is a major undertaking to keep that moving at the same time as we're trying to recover more broader health services. Obviously, you've seen the announcement now that it's now open to 40 to 50-year-olds in terms of the booster vaccinations. So there's work underway to prepare and enable that to happen. Paul, I'm sure, will update later on the IPR, Integrated Performance Report, in terms of the ongoing operational pressures. So I won't cover that in detail now, but just to say, as always, the pressure continues not to abate in terms of the demand that's coming through to all of our services, everything from primary care to specialist acute services. And there's a significant amount of work ongoing within the system around that. And indeed, later on the agenda, we'll cover the winter plan, which isn't really winter, it's all year round now in terms of the pressures we're experiencing on our services. And equally, we'll be covering later on in the agenda, I'm sure, our elective recovery work as well. particularly in the context of the challenges that the National NHS England team have set related to cutting down significantly where appropriate our 52-week waits, abolishing 104-week waits, and trying to stabilise the elective care waiting list, which is all incredibly challenging for us to achieve by the end of March. So, Chair, I'll probably leave it there, and Ed hopefully will be joining us a bit later. It might be that Ed wants to give another couple of words on other areas of focus, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Richard at this point? Okay, thank you very much. The next section is strategy and service development and the West Suffolk Alliance. Kate.
Morning, thank you very much. As always, there's lots in here, so I'm just going to cherry pick a few pieces that I think are of note. So just to start with, we've, as part of the kind of changing model of care that we're introducing now, we're relying a little bit more, and it's baby steps but exciting ones, around digital innovations. So I've just put a couple of the details on some of the pieces that are being trialled or becoming more of a mainstay now in some of it, especially around at-home kind of diagnostics and monitoring equipment around pulse oximetry and the health kits, etc., that are now being put into homes. I think it's fair to say that there's a huge potential to do more in this space, and I think from the Richard alluded to the kind of changes that are underway around the ICS, I think that affords us probably more opportunities to be ambitious in that space as well. I put in there a bit of detail around the work we're doing between so our mental health provider, Northern Suffolk Foundation Trust, and Abbeycroft Leisure, just to see what more, and top of mind, what more we can do at a kind of place-based neighbourhood level to enhance mental well-being. So that's using Abbeycroft and Suffolk Mine staff together to support some of the locality teams and some of the community organisations to help prevent using exercise and that kind of broader approach to well-being to help people with their mental health and promote positive well-being, but also using it as a way to kind of, one of the biggest challenges with working with the voluntary sector, and it's something we're getting much better at it, but is capturing the data so that we can make the case to actually understand if we are investing in this different approach, what impact that gives us. I think we're very lucky in West Suffolk. I've said it before on several occasions. Several of our, Abbeycroft Leisure being one of the leading ones, several of our voluntary sector organisations are sort of leading nationally in this space of being able to understand the social capital their model gives them. So, and there's the link in the paper, which is for a video that they pulled together because they've also applied for a dream fund, which is another bit of money. But I think the video in itself, I popped it in because it just gives you a really good picture of the different ways in which the organisation is currently working with our local communities and the impact it's having on people's lives. We have got a very small pot of money, which you're all aware of, that has been sitting with our district and borough colleagues to underpin what a little bit in the same vein around well-being work done at community level, and not necessarily setting 1,000 flowers blooming, but looking at what we've already committed to around investing in local assets, social prescribing, helping people to deal with death and bereavement. And there's pieces of work that are not necessarily nailed down yet, but will be underway in the next year, and hopefully we can carry it on over the next couple of years as the funding is being held separately, just to again prove the concept around actually putting some funding in that preventative space and the impact it has kind of more broadly on our communities and our population. And then if I skip down to the colourful speech bubbles that we have in the paper, which is just at the end of 3.9, you're familiar with our One Team programme that we've been running with our integrated neighbourhood teams, and I had the pleasure of going to one of the celebration events, and it was incredibly empowering actually. I think just listening to the appetite from the kind of leaders from social care, mental health, primary care, district and boroughs or families and communities team in that space, how they are really have the appetite to do more, but don't have the time, don't have the headspace, and don't necessarily have the volume to their voice. So I think the speech bubbles kind of capture it well, but from a kind of an alliance and a working in an integrated way, and again underpinning that sort of broader governance piece that's underway at the moment with the creation of the integrated care system. Again, it's another another bit of evidence and a kind of a mandate for actually what we could achieve if we get that model right, and we delegate some more authority and some more resource down to that neighbourhood level. And then I just put in the list of the headline initiatives that we've got in place and we've agreed as a system around winter, which I think will be touched on later in the agenda as well. But it has been about understanding kind of what are the pieces of our jigsaw that aren't making sense at the moment and are either driving activity or becoming more and more of a kind of a problem around how we create flow in our system. So we've put additional therapy and medical cover in over the weekends in the hospital and in the community. We've put a social prescriber base in the hospital to help with discharge and how you support people going home to make sure it's a successful discharge. We put additional community beds in and hospice beds, and we are investing in our community teams to support a 24/7 wraparound. A lot of these schemes depend on workforce, and that is our biggest challenge. So being realistic, these are what we've committed to doing, and some of them are very much motoring, but equally we acknowledge the challenge that we have in finding the people to bolster the capacity, and that also goes from a primary care perspective as well. And then lastly, I've included a piece around our ex-rough sleepers in Bury St Edmunds. I'm not going to go through all the detail, but basically this is a really complicated piece of work that we've done across all of our agencies, because these were a group of people who actually, when you looked, there couldn't be a stronger case for integrating and taking down the walls in between our individual organisations. You had people who are complex in their needs, but also from a community and a kind of more holistic perspective, needed more than just health and care intervention. So there's been a team working together and 11 units of accommodation purchased and paid for to support these rough sleepers to basically think differently about their lives. I'm not going to go through the detail, but I've put a couple of case studies in the appendices, and they're good reading really, because I think it helps you understand possibly just the amount of potential there is there if we do have a better offer, a more joined up offer for some of our more complicated members of our population. And very lastly, there's the most simplistic version I could find really, or create, for our kind of governance model moving forward, looking at how we come together as a system at a place-based level, and then how that links into the kind of broader pieces around the integrated care partnership, integrated care boards at the Suffolk and North East Essex level, which Richard was alluding to earlier. But there's a significant piece of work going on at both place and at that broader system, as in Suffolk and North East Essex system level. And these are just some of the headlines that are coming out of that. There we go. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Kate? Lisa?
Not a question, but thank you for including those case studies, Kate, because I think they just sort of show how it all pulls together to make impact on people's lives. And I love the way that there's a real positivity out of it, rather than sometimes I think through our language and through the way that we work, we kind of pigeonhole people as problems through our, we talk about frequent flyers and high callers, and we were talking about this yesterday, about how sometimes we focus on their behaviours and actually, don't always follow it through to resolving the problems that cause their behaviours. So actually, that it's such great case studies, and I think should just be the start of what we do for people that are a little more complicated than just being supported by one service. So thank you for sharing those.
No, absolutely. And just one other, when you get to the bottom of one of them is actually then considering to use their own experiences to potentially go on to help other people, which I think is lovely. Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Going to the bubble chart diagram, one of the comments, one funding pot at local level would be really help. Is this something that is likely to happen under the new arrangement post-April? And secondly, are the winter pressures fully funded, please?
On both of those, if I start with the last one first, I feel every time I put something in about escalation, I feel slightly that I'm stealing Paul's thunder, because Paul, they are funded. It's been part of a bidding process that we've been doing with the region and part of a kind of wider national scheme around winter preparedness. So they are. So the money's there. It's the people that we need to make sure that we find, which is the tricky piece. And on the bubbles, and that's always been our ambition, to see what we could delegate down to that neighbourhood level. And we were having a conversation the very first thing this morning, actually, as an exec team, on making sure that that's not lost in the governance conversations that we're having at the moment, so that where the governance is set up so that it facilitates that, us being able to do that. And I suppose most pertinent to you, it all comes down to whether the money's there to delegate down, and I think that's the other bit to that conversation. But it would be incredible, and it would be so empowering, I think, to those local teams to feel in control of that spend.
Thank you. Can I have one? Kate, can I just ask a little bit more about the WUSAN item 2.3 and the speed of rollout of the next phase? I ask because we may be going into a phase where we can't go into care homes again. We don't know yet, but it's possible that we shall get to that again in the winter. At the moment, we can go in, and it's a very useful facility to have, and very disappointing when it can't be used. And I just wonder whether we could get on with the next phase sort of before the winter bites much harder, partly as one of the things we do to support primary care, among other things.
So that's been one of my questions back to the team, and in fairness, I haven't had an answer, so I will go and chase it up, because I think it has had an impact, but I think that people have been slightly tentative about its rollout, and it's quite nice to hear you speaking so positively about it, actually, because I do think there is a clear need. So I'll take that as an action and come back. Yeah,
because of course, when you can go in and go nearly back to normal, the emphasis goes off it, although it's still useful. But then you wish you'd got it if the circumstances changed, so we're back to how we were in one of the lockdowns or semi-lockdowns.
And also, ideally, we're looking at changing how we work in the longer term, medium to long term as well. And some of these should become part of our mainstay.
Yeah, thank you.
They're of value.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Then patient and public involvement experience, Lisa.
Thank you. So this is a paper of two parts, really. There is the involvement strategy for commissioning activity as we transition into the ICB, which we are required to have in place by March 2022, but actually it was a really good time to do this because so much has changed within our patient involvement and experience team and the way that they're working, that actually it was a good time to do the involvement strategy. And then the second part is their Q1 and 2 activity report, which just demonstrates how they're working through each of our programme boards and alliances and the breadth of work that they are facilitating, because they're a small team and they work really well with all our partners. So and I think when you look at Appendix 2 and you see the breadth of work that the teams are doing around patient and public involvement, it's quite significant. So I would really recommend that you have a good look at that. But the involvement strategy really provides our 3-year plan for working to ensure that we have really good patient involvement and experience throughout all our decision making at neighbourhood, place and ICB level. So it has a number of guiding principles that it adheres to and would want to see delivered through the strategy. And I think we are really good at doing some of them, but we're not consistent and we don't always complete the cycle. So we're great at involving people in procurement processes. We're really good in some areas of our redesign of services involving the public and patients, but we don't always close that loop around. And then how do we feed back the effectiveness of what we've procured? How do we feed back, you know, how the redesign of services has impacted on people? So we really want to make sure that we're putting that involvement and experience right through that cycle of redesign and quality improvement. And the other thing I just want to really promote is the engagement hub that the team have launched. So it's a great site. Please have a look at it. It needs more development. It's only just started. There's been a few teething problems that we've had to resolve, but it gives us a huge opportunity to engage with public, and there are a number of micro sites through that neighbourhood teams, the alliances can hold, so that it's not just a Suffolk and North East Essex site. So I would really recommend that you have a look at that site, and as we develop it further and further, it will go from strength to strength, I think, as a way of communicating and understanding what patients and public think about the health services that we deliver. So I'll leave it there. The strategy has been through our clinical executive forums, so shouldn't be of any surprise to you. Year one focuses on the culture and actually how in a new world of understanding the governance around health, how do we make sure that public and patient involvement and experience is threaded through everything we do. The second year is really focusing on the development of the systems to support that. And then the third year is really going to be an evaluation year and thinking about how we need to progress, because it didn't feel right just before we launch into such massive change across health to absolutely define what year three will look like. I think we just need to allow ourselves a bit of space to refresh and take stock of the activity that happens next year and the year after. But thank you, Christopher.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Lisa? Jeff.
Hi Lisa, thanks for that detailed report. It's just a fact, I'm not sure whether it's me that's wrong. In 5.1, you talk about integrated care board and the alliances becoming statutory bodies. I didn't know the alliances were going to be statutory. Am I wrong?
Sorry, trying to operate mute and find the page. No, you're right. I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
Oh well, thank you. I wasn't sure
whether it was me.
I missed something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Any further? Thank you. Now, item 8 then, Amanda, the response to sustainability questions raised at our May meeting.
Thank you, Christopher. And really, to add value to this item, I've invited Andrew Urquhart, the CCG Sustainability Lead, to actually bring to life the paper. So, Andrew, I believe you're there.
I am indeed. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Andrew.
Good morning, everybody. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to update you on the two questions. So I prepared a paper which has obviously been submitted. So the two questions are around pollution, and the first question, what data is available and what are we using? So in terms of headlines, to give colleagues and members of the public some context, my role is about reducing the impacts of climate change and other environmental factors on population health. So actually dealing with air pollution or climate change shouldn't be treated in isolation. and our approach is very much to coordinate those things together. So in terms of the work that's been done so far, I've been using the data that's available through the Suffolk Air Quality Profile, West Suffolk's Air Quality Status Report, where regular data is taken in terms of statutory monitoring and other reports from Public Health England. Now, just to give everyone a feel, what does that in essence mean? The areas have to be identified where if air quality is in exceedance of the Environmental Protection Act in terms of particulate matter and nitrous oxide and so on and so forth, that extra monitoring needs to be put in place to tackle that. So within West Suffolk itself, the main pollution sources identified is road traffic, worst generally in market towns, and no surprises that links with HGVs, which are more polluting. I won't go through reports in any detail, but just some headlines. Overall, the air quality within West Suffolk itself is very good, but we do have some hotspots, if you like. So in terms of the market towns, the monitoring that's being done, Brandon has improved and is below national guidance levels. HGVs still are a concern for residents. Bury St Edmunds itself, overall the elevations are down. There is one air quality management area, I think that's on Sicklesmere Road, that's showing levels of stabilising in and around the acceptable levels. Bury did receive a spike, again linked to some roadworks in town and vehicles that are idling there. Great Barton is the area probably of greatest concern in terms of the air quality management area there. The air pollution levels there still continue to exceed government guidelines and thresholds. The A143 is the main route through there, which is causing that. And for the local authority, more work is required to try and reduce those impacts. Haverhill is compliant. Mildenhall and Lakenheath are also compliant, but the reductions in air pollution in those areas haven't matched the rest of the area, and more work's needed there to see if it's linked to the air bases and the traffic that's subsequently with it. Newmarket has an air quality management area which has been reduced in size in 2017, and that continues to be in and around acceptable levels. Overall, in terms of the CCG itself, I've started to do some more work in terms of how are we actually capturing this, which is what the question asks. And the GP referral data system uses hierarchical coding. There is a code for high quality air pollution, but it isn't specifically used as a referral at the moment. Now, this does link to the wider work that I'm doing and the response to question 2, which is what interventions are we doing in terms of education and risk management and pulling this together. So I won't go through the whole detailed response, but basically the last 6 months has very much been about. So I've got something up there saying I've got bad quality, so I hope colleagues can still hear me. So the interventions. Okay, thank you, Christopher. So the interventions, in terms of integrated working with our partners, we now are part of the Suffolk Air Quality Group meeting, which was predominantly with local authority colleagues, where the statutory responsibility lies, but actually we need joined up and holistic thinking to tackle this, which is one of the main areas of the Suffolk Air Quality Profile that was released in the summer. Basically, the profile says that small-scale interventions are unlikely to lead to significant reductions in air pollution. So we need to collaborate and integrate, which is what the last 6 months of my work has really been around this area. So in no particular order, attending the meetings to get joined up thinking, we'll be contributing and taking part in the Suffolk Air Quality Summit in January. which will bring the leaders together to brief them on the salient issues and start to get some more collaborative working on where we need to focus our attention. We've actually had dialogue with an organisation called Global Action Plan. And Global Action Plan are a national organisation looking at, and they're responsible for an event called Clean Air Day. And we were hoping to apply for some funding to actually do some GP educational work and some public engagement work around that. But there was already a pilot project in place. Now, the follow-on from that pilot project will be they're seeking 30 to 50 general practices and organisations to work for, and we put our hand up and said that we would like to work with them on that in terms of raising awareness within certain areas, what members of the public and GPs and wider actions that can be taken. And we're told we'll be told more about that in December. In terms of staff education and awareness raising, very much been about just bringing to everyone's attention what the links are with climate change and health and whatnot. So we've had a Clean Air Day lunch and learn session. We've had staff briefings where we brought in colleagues from Colchester Borough Council who have done a very intense no idling campaign to demonstrate to staff how that links to our travel and transport policy, which is very much about trying to reduce vehicle and business mileage. In terms of what we're looking to do going forward, obviously I've mentioned the summit. There is wider work that we're doing, although attributed to climate change. I come back to you cannot disassociate the two. So work that we'll be doing to reduce the impact of meter dose inhalers that contain greenhouse gases. They are still a part of the issue. Working with our trusts across the ICS on the reduction of switching anaesthetic gases and reducing nitrous oxide losses, and linking into the point that Kate mentioned earlier in terms of social prescribing. So improving the number of green spaces that are available, increasing a biodiversity plan as part of our emerging green plan, which will also have planting and use of trees in terms of pollutant filters and so on and so forth. And then, in terms of staff impact, our Green Action Plan, we have 5 objectives, one of which is to tackle and reduce air pollution. So that will look at, in the future, how this links together with trusts and the ICS in terms of uses of electric vehicles, remote models of working when COVID lifts, so that we can reduce staff business mileage and our pollution impact. And also working with our procurement teams in terms of taking this message and actually influencing our suppliers and our supply chain and our procurement, where we can also have an impact on organisational behaviour change outside our organisations. So I hope that gives everyone a flavour of what we've been looking at to address air pollution, and open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from anybody? Andy?
Yeah, Andrew, I was just interested to know, you mentioned about Bury St Edmunds and air pollution and how referral quality had improved. I was just wanting to ask what the effect of the A14 is on Bury St Edmunds air quality, in the fact that it does go slap bang through the middle of the town, and whether there is much work to monitor that and what is happening there.
So I don't have that data, Andy, to be brutally frank. The air quality monitoring that's done by Bury St Edmunds Council is focused around the areas that I've talked about, like Sicklesmere Road. So part of the air quality work and the summit work that we're doing with other organisations is to look at where do we need to now take this data that we do have and look and focus on particular areas. So that could well be part of that wider work, but I'm not aware of, we don't as a CCG have that data to hand at the moment, but like rolling that into wider work. September's meeting for the air quality group was around, right, we've got this baseline data with our air quality monitoring. What now do we need to look at to integrate that across Suffolk? So that will probably form part of that next stage of work, Indy.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you. And just wondered, in terms of future opportunities like future system, new hospital build, it would seem to me there's an excellent opportunity here to have the conversation how we might be able to reduce our carbon footprint, air pollution, etc. within that conversation. Is that something you linked into?
Yes, Paul. So, like I said, part of our Green Action Plan, and we'll be the trusts and the ICS and the CCG as is will be releasing green plans into the new year, all for sign off in January and March. Air pollution forms part of that. Greener NHS have released guides over the last 3 or 4 weeks, which say that all of the green plans that are developed, which is our strategies, must include areas that tackle air pollution. So getting that joined up thinking. West Suffolk, myself and West Suffolk Council and the Foundation Trust, we are in regular dialogue now with the local authority and through the Suffolk Climate Change Board to interlink these together. So this will become sort of the standard way of working, that we don't work in silos, and we make sure we use those opportunities. So, for instance, there are high-level conversations going on about how when the new hospital for Bury will have to be a net zero hospital, and we'll include these elements in it, and that's no idling on site, electric vehicle infrastructure, and so on and so forth.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
I was going to be along the same lines from a future systems perspective. That's one of the most exciting pieces, I think, in those conversations about actually you've got an opportunity to really be ambitious. But I just wanted to also add to that. I think we had a good conversation at the integrated, at the ICS, last ICS board around this, and what you could really feel amongst all the kind of system-wide execs is there is a real appetite to be joined up and to be ambitious. And I think Andrew's doing a brilliant job of capitalising on that as well, because from an integration perspective, it's there are so many huge wins there. And the only other piece was internally in the hospital, we've looked at where, given the current situation that we are in operationally and in terms of people's own kind of well-being, we're looking at where we would have more of a focus on cost improvement programs, having a focus on carbon reduction programs, or basically encouraging people to think about what could they do at their own individual level just to be greener. So little changes, but actually they equate to a big change in total in an organisation of that size. I think there is a real awareness of the footprint that they occupy in our West Suffolk system. So I think, and also what's really nice, I think, it's creating quite a lot of energy. It gives some people possibly some tools. So there's so much in the media around, we need to change the way we are, but people feel slightly, what does that mean? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Especially when work takes up such a considerable chunk of your life. I think it's it's had a lovely response, which I think is a real positive.
Thank you, Kate. Could I just come back on just a couple of bits just to add to that? That's very kind. We can't deal with this in isolation, and it is, like you said in the ICS board, a real unifier. With air pollution, with climate change, we really do need to rebrand how we tackle this, and this is why the health service has such a role to play in this. It's positive. We don't have to focus on all the doom-laden scenarios that climate change and air pollution and whatnot. We need to be mindful of them, but actually we have a role to really galvanise colleagues and the public and take them with us on this journey, that actually if we make these changes that you've alluded to, they're actually positive. This doesn't have to be a negative, and I think using health outcomes and benefits as part of this in more integrated thinking will only be a good thing for us. The other thing I would add in there, that we have started on that journey of staff training. So across the ICS, staff are now receiving a qualification called carbon literacy, which is about raising that internal awareness. That's a 1.5 day course commitment. The CCG's facilities team's been on it, and the ICS sustainability leads within the trusts within the ICS have now been on it, and we'll be working with a programme with the regional team to roll that out, and our procurement teams have as well. So nationally, or certainly regionally, we're ahead of the curve. We're seen as the leaders in this area, in some elements, certainly around carbon literacy. So that's positive as well.
Thank you very much. Zora.
Thank you, Andrew. I think actually you've answered the questions that I was going to ask in your answers to other people's questions. Because one of them was that you mentioned lots of work being done in the hospital, but I was wondering how that was, how you were working with primary care and community services as well to do the same things in terms of virtual consulting, electric vehicles, etc. You didn't mention promoting walking and bike and cycling, but I expect that is on your agenda, and I think that's really important. The access, as you know, and I always point out, to the hospital, if you're a biker or a walker, is not good enough, especially if you're not well, let alone if you're fit and healthy. And the other question was you, which I think again you have answered really, was that you talked about plans for January and plans for March, and I was wondering what is happening now and what is your timescale for things actually happening, not just for the plans to be written and verified and so forth. But you said there was some staff training happening already, so that's great. But yeah, what are the timescales for things actually happening?
Yeah, so in terms of primary care, you're quite right. Historically, NHS, we have focused on trusts around the sustainability ask. There is an acceptance at national level that actually primary care has a significant role to play, because although when we're talking about environmental impact, hospitals and trusts by their very nature and sheer scale have a disproportionate emissions and whatnot, primary care is frontline. So actually primary care in terms of embedded into communities and making a difference is hugely important. So in terms of the green plans, we have a Greener Practice Essex and Suffolk network, which is a network of GPs who meet bi-monthly, managed by a colleague, the GP in Essex, Cassandra Thorogood. We met 2 weeks ago. I'm working with them to actually ensure that we have a chapter in terms of strategy and direction. So the plan bit first, written by GPs for GPs rather than me as a sustainability lead and a representative of CCG and ICS saying, I think we should do this. So that terms of engagement on the ground, the GPs will actually help write that element of the ICS-wide sustainability strategy. In terms of what's going on the ground, we've circulated some guides and some carbon footprinting tools to that network. We are looking at doing some dedicated training and some rollout around inhaler switches. And in fact, the medicines management team are arranging one with the pharmacy forums and the local pharmacy committees for December. And there'll also be some training for practice nurses in February as well, or probably February. So there's actually stuff happening in the interim. This isn't just a case of trying to write lots of strategies and have plans. There's action on the ground. Going back to what you said on active travel, walking and cycling, absolutely. We won some money, some grant money to do Recycling UK and its big bike revival for the CCG. We're hoping to win something next year if the grant comes available to roll something out wider to practices, which is webinars to support active travel, bike doctor sessions to get people cycling more, and looking at how we might put more infrastructure in there. In terms of the new hospital, I take it as a read that basically active travel and transport infrastructure and access to it that you've alluded to, it won't get through unless it's got that. So that will be the blueprint going forward for the 40 new proposed net zero hospitals. So there is stuff going along as we make the plans, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Dare I go to Jeff next while he's still with us, because I know that you've got some troubles.
Thank you for that, Christopher. It might be a point to Paul actually. I'm just wondering, what action are we taking? I mean, obviously a lot of this is down the supply chains, and how are we addressing that, and what we're doing differently in the future, or will be doing differently in the future, or currently. Thank you.
So is that, sorry, Jeff, so in the now, for supply chains, we're in the internal awareness raising phase, if you like. So the ICS procurement leads, that there is there's two elements to this that's coming down the track from Greener NHS. So the NHS centrally has released its supply chain roadmap. What that has basically said is all contracts over £5 million from April next year will have to include a minimum of 10% social value in terms of how we evaluate our procurements. So by definition, I'm working with the procurement teams on that internally. And in fact, I've trialled some answers on two recent procurements. So there's work in progress there. What will that entail? Social value will include that there are various social value themes. So it's economic recovery, it's COVID recovery, it's diversity and equality, there's a climate change ask. So there are various themes in there. So this comes back to integrating everything together in one way. So there's going to be guidance which is released nationally in January. So we will look at that, and in terms of the procurement ask for how we tackle this going forward, myself and a couple of other colleagues, we're basically going to do a regional response to this and layer it. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel. So rather than the ICSs in the region and the trusts within that all running off and doing their own thing, we're actually coordinating it to look at where is the national role, where is the regional role, where is the very localised role, and let's not reinvent the wheel. So we'll basically see probably quite uniform approaches to what we're going to ask. Two elements to that. After Christmas, we'll do some more internal staff training, building on all the some procurement leads within the trusts have taken part in carbon literacy. So we've got to roll that out to their teams, but we've also got to do wider engagement. And when I talk about supply chain, it's not just goods and services. There's the links with the voluntary community sector. So we're looking to do a piece of work with Suffolk University and Home Start in terms of how these issues might be tackled. The voluntary community sector have a 2-year grace on all these things that have been released. So they won't have to, because of the unique set of circumstances they have, they will not have to do these changes to begin with. But by 2030, as an NHS, you will not be able to procure goods and services from the NHS unless you sign up to the social value objectives, which includes climate change and so on and so forth within it. So there's a huge piece of engagement to do internally and externally, and we're just at the start of that process.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Andrew. That's been a really interesting item. I think you can tell by the number of questions that it's something that the governing body is really interested in. I do believe very much in what gets measured gets done, and just think that if we can pick it up offline. But I think it'd be good as we develop our indicators for the new integrated care board that we actually have something that we look at in the performance report on how we're doing. Set ourselves some targets, and actually so that the board is seeing it regularly.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Be delighted to take that offline with you. There is some work being done, I think, with Lisa Park and colleagues on the PTOM and how we link that together. But we need to link that to the wider climate work as well. So yeah, that would be great. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, just a statement and a comment about procurement, if I may. Just wanted to amplify Kate and Zoe's points around primary care and different models. So typically we will build a big hospital and then we'll expect everybody to come to that hospital. But the exciting bit for me of this is the impact on service models. So actually people don't get in a car to travel to the big hospital, and actually how you get care closer to home conversation. That's a really exciting bit for me in terms of the opportunities around system first and the way we construct our healthcare moving forward. So I think that'd be great to see the ambition of that coming through when it does. The bit on procurement, again, I want to sort of echo sort of Jane's point a little bit around there is nothing stopping us giving a greater weight to social value within current procurements. We currently ask a number of questions around social values, but I would suggest we don't necessarily give it the credence or the importance when we do our evaluation. So there is something we can do now without necessarily having to actually wait for the national guidance. So happy to be involved in that. And I've had a few wider conversations with our social care colleagues and etc. So if I can influence that, just contact me and let me know.
Thanks, Paul. Sorry, Christopher, could I just, well, I can come back on that offline, or I'm conscious of time, Chair, sorry.
Okay, Andrew.
Just a brief comment on the fact that Mildenhall and Lakenheath have not shown any significant reduction in the levels of pollution. And I'm sure there must be an element of the amount of hydrocarbons coming out the back end of some American airplanes flying in and out of the air bases at Mildenhall and Lakenheath, and probably quite a lot of stuff coming out of the exhaust pipes of the American cars that are imported in large quantities for the American personnel to drive around in. Perhaps we could encourage the US Air Force to give some incentives for electric cars.
Thank you. I must say, I was struck by the mention of Great Barton and Sigglesmere, where there are 30-mile-an-hour speed limits with speed cameras. And I was thinking that obviously vehicles spend longer per mile travelled in those zones and therefore chuck out more, and also will be slowing down to avoid the speed cameras. So there's somewhere something to be fed in when people try and put in new speed limits and things of that kind about what the environmental effects are, because they may not be positive.
Yeah, I think, Christopher, it's linked more to idling. I mean, there's more emissions, I believe, in the cars travelling faster. But I think once vehicles slow down and idle, that's when we get spikes. Thus, the local authorities will do campaigns targeted at turning your vehicle off at school gates and so on and so forth. So that's always quite powerful. But we can, I think we'll get the opportunity to hear from colleagues in January from Public Health England, as was, who will be preparing some data for colleagues to review. If I could just quickly, when Paul mentioned primary care, sustainable models of care, Paul, will be one of the chapters in our strategy. And I've just been preparing a document for colleagues that will be circulating this week. There are a number of should-haves and could-haves that are being asked nationally. And I'm sort of throwing down the gauntlet and saying to everybody, we should take them to potentially wherever possible as read. And what else can we do on top? Let's be ambitious, but do it in a smart, structured way and not try and do it all at once. And you're right, in terms of the social value, we have I've evaluated that on 2 recent procurements to get a flavour of what does the market understand and not understand, to where do we need to pitch this. And actually some work done, I think, by Guy's Hospital in London has shown that the more that you add on in terms of social value to the procurement, the more focus and in supply chain engagement and action you're actually going to get. So you're absolutely right. I'd be delighted to work with you on that as well. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. That's clearly a topic of great interest to the board, Andrew. So we look forward to welcoming you back again at some point.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Procurement, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Christopher. I'll take the paper as read, but probably pull out a couple of things, if I may. Very quickly, pathology, we are sort of ready to go, but we took a slight pause to talk to our current providers to ascertain timelines and likelihood of disruption, but in particular around the current conversation around future ICS and formal collaboration. So again, we're just making sure we dotting the I's, crossing the T's, but essentially we are ready to go in terms of the process we've mapped out. Probably the more important points within this paper, science, mental health. If you remember, there are a 2-pronged approach to mental health. One is an assurance piece, which essentially surrounds crisis, children and young people, community and learning disability services. And so we issued the workbooks, which is essentially a way of asking organizations to give us the evidence of the service of fit for purpose. They've covered every aspect of quality and expected service delivery. Those were received, and then that would follow with a panel that would look at the evidence and go back to the organisation and say, here are the gaps, these are things we need to talk about. Unfortunately, CQC visitors put an interruption and a delay in that process. So we had a conversation as to how we might approach that. And it became very clear to us when we were having the conversation that we were missing significant opportunities. There was lots of evidence that was coming out of discussions and group meetings. So we've decided essentially to take a much more collaborative approach to the evidence, shall we say. And that essentially puts us back on track in terms of completing by January as we'd planned. So again, some positive movement, some positive engagement on that process, and we'll feedback in due course. The other element of the mental health was clearly the services at MIA, an adjunct to those services. So things like the Community Connect and a daytime hub sort of meetings, which are for patients essentially who don't require secondary care input, but require lower intervention approaches. So I'm glad to say that went out to market on Friday as planned. And we aim to bring back the procurement outcome back in March. So again, very much on track. The last thing is around dementia, which is subject to ratification part 2 governing body, and due course will find its way into the procurement paper in January. So I'll stop there and happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, looks like not, Paul. So it looks like we've got that straight through. Thank you. Now to the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Annual Report, which is back to you, Lisa.
Thank you. So this very summarised set of slides just gives a bit of an update on the programme management aspect of SEND and some of the work that the team has been doing in Suffolk. So I think the first point that I would like to pull out is the increase in establishment and recruitment to both our designated clinical officer role and our deputy designated clinical officer role that we have across Suffolk and North Essex, which has really increased our ability to be able to work more as strategic partners within the SEND programme team in Suffolk. So that's been a real positive and a real enabler for us to be able to take the health partnership working with Suffolk County Council forward quite significantly. So over the last year, there has been a continuation really of benchmarking ourselves against the health statutory duties that are detailed in the SEND Code of Practice and the Children and Families Act. And one of the slides that talks about progress and next steps, that has the statutory duties, really talks about and explains how we are delivering on those statutory duties. So if I kind of wound back a few years, we were not present in the education, health and care planning process. We weren't present in tribunal and mediation processes, and the quality of health advice into education, health and care plans was a lot weaker from that. The real role and strength of the DCOs is in ensuring consistency for all the EHCPs that children and young people in Suffolk get, and ensuring that they are of really good quality, the health advice that individual practitioners put into those EHCPs. So it's part of the code of conduct that we should be involved in and working with tribunal recommendations. You'll know that's the process that families go through if they want to challenge their EHCP. So it's really important that health has a strong seat around that table, and we've really been able to develop that. The quality improvement slide just details some of the work that we've been able to do to support health partners in making sure that the advice in EHCPs is good advice for children and young people. Some of the work we've done with family services, the training that we've done. I think probably the most important bullet point I would just like to pull out is the impact and outcomes framework. So SEND is really, I've always felt is really the programme of SEND is ahead of how we manage a number of our other programmes. So it really is health, education and social care coming together to develop a joint package for children and young people. But what we've never been able to do is really test those outcomes. So how do you at a person level test the outcomes that joint plan seeks to deliver? So we are just looking at how we co-produce and develop the outcomes framework. It's quite a way in development, but it just needs a bit more work. And what that will do is look at impact and outcomes at an individual level. How do we understand the impact that our service delivery together and education comes together, and then how do we at service level understand if we are commissioning the right health services to achieve the right outcomes for children and young people. So that's really exciting. Next year, we will continue to implement the SEND strategy, which I know you've all been cited on, that's 21 to 23. We are working with Suffolk County Council on the implementation of the action plan following the independent review by Lincolnshire County Council, which was a challenging review for us as a SEND programme board and for Suffolk County Council, but actually will take us from strength to strength in how we support children and young people and their families through family services and specialist education placement processes. We will continue to look at the SEND governance, structure and accountability within both health and within the wider SEND programme board, and particularly as we move into an ICB, understanding where SEND sits within the new governance framework. We suspect that we will be re-inspected at some point over the next year by Ofsted and CQC, and we welcome that. We do believe that there has been some significant improvements, and I'm sure Richard might want to update on the massive challenges and massive improvements that his team have been working on with neurodevelopmental, etc. And then actually the development of our co-production strategy with our Suffolk population. So lots to do, but it just gives you a bit of a sense of some of the work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa, for that update. Could you say a few more words about the independent review from Lincolnshire in terms of what it produced and what it said, please?
Yeah, sure. So we were aware that from our families that we work with that there were concerns around the educational placement process and through the support that families were getting from the family services team within Suffolk County Council. So that's a team that are there to support families through the process of the EHCP, mediation, tribunal, and the whole element of SEND, really. So families had been raising concerns around some of the support they were getting, and were encouraging us to look at that a little more closely. So Suffolk County Council commissioned a peer review by Lincolnshire County Council, and they visited. It was really looking at Suffolk County Council's processes, but obviously as a partner, were involved to some level in that review, and they made some really, really good recommendations. It was it's always difficult when you have a spotlight put on things that you would want to see performing better than it was found. But I do think that Suffolk County Council have responded really well. I think that they made a decision to publish the review. They made a decision to have an independent review from, they could have done an internal review, but actually they made a stand that they wanted to do this properly. And I'm sure has shone a light on some things that we need to improve. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Any further? Okay, thank you very much. Well, we recognise the importance of that work, Lisa, and thank you for your continuing involvement in it and reporting of it. Now to Amanda, the emergency preparedness and resilience.
Okay, thank you, Christopher.
Paul.
It's me.
It's you. Okay, my apologies.
Apologies.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
No, that's fine, Christopher. Just to give a bit of context to this paper, we are all essentially duty bound to emergency preparedness, resilience, and responsiveness framework. And I think the important point to raise on that, and whilst there is no sort of immediate sanction in terms of performance, it is enshrined in Civil Contingency Act, NHS Act, and NHS Constitution. So again, the important point of this is that if we were not ready in the event of something happening, then actually there would probably be some questions around what our preparedness looked like. So this is quite an important topic, and quite a lot of work and detail goes beyond this work. We are Category 2 responders technically, so we are there to support NHS England to assure them that our providers are in state of readiness in terms of their core standard around EPR, and equally we are there to assure NHS England that we have things in place. So back in sort of tail end of July, as the accountable emergency officer, I was contacted by NHS England to be told what the process was likely to look like. And it's fair to say that this year it's a fairly light touch process where essentially you have the organisation self-assessing, and then we meet with each of the organisation to look at the evidence and put a report together based on all the criteria that you see in the appendix. So quite a detailed piece of work. So the first table that you've got in document essentially paints quite a good picture in terms that most areas are significant compliant, and you will see that that to be significant compliant is quite a high bar. It's 100%. 99% won't do it. Absolutely 100% to achieve to be formally totally compliant. In terms of the three areas to focus on, CCG you'll see with significant compliant. There's just a minor area around how we engage with mutual aid, which is something we will tidy up as we move forward. I think you'll see that PPG are fully compliant, which is great news, but you can't help but spot that ESEC are not compliant, and that's because they essentially fall below 76% watershed mark. The good news in a sense is that the reason for that is because the number of criteria was slightly reduced, so the demolition changes has shifted them into a non-compliance part, but also to point out there are about 68, 69% fully compliant on the standard, and the remainder are only partially compliant. So the team are absolutely confident they can raise that bar and make them sort of significantly compliant relatively easily. So that work is ongoing. The final thing to say, that's been externally validated by NHS in England, and they actually sort of concur with our findings in terms of where we are in terms of our own self-assessment, in terms of our awareness, in terms of EPRR. So I'll stop there. It's for noting to assure the board that work is ongoing, and we continue to monitor and improve the current level of compliance.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you, Paul. Won't be with you in a second. Right, now on to the finance, performance and scrutiny section. Jane, the plan months 7 to 12.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I will introduce this paper and then various director colleagues will take over on their sections, as this is a paper that pulls together various different planning returns that we've made in the last couple of weeks. So just by way of context, and I'm afraid that people have heard me say this far too many times, hopefully this is one of the last times, we are in a year of two halves. The emergency planning regime meant that we developed and submitted plans for the first half of the year, which came to the governing body earlier in the year, and this is the second half. So as set out in the paper, the guidance and the allocations for the second half of the year were received on the 30th of September, and we've been working through within the CCGs and with our partners to pull together the various elements that are required for the second half, the H2 planning. So where they are different or additional to those that we made in the first half of the year, they're included in the paper for sign-off. So there are basically four elements that we're looking at today. The narrative part of the plan, which kind of provides the overall context and builds on the H1 narrative, which has been included in the packs for information. We are sharing with you the activity and performance numbers for the system. And from my point of view, the most important and exciting bit, the financial plan and budget, which needs formal sign-off at the board, although that has been reviewed by the Finance Committee. We're also sharing the system winter plan, and whilst that's not part of our formal submissions as part of the H2 planning, we thought that this was it was a good time to share this with the board because it is an important live document. So the paper explains that the guidance that came out for the second half of the year had no real surprises in it, and hopefully it wouldn't do, given that it is partway through the year. But it's got 6 key areas that are set out in 2.2 in the paper that we need to concentrate on: supporting the health and well-being of staff, delivering the vaccination programme, on both elective, continuing transforming and delivering and restoring services on elective and cancer care, but also on emergency services as well. So basically focusing on both parts of that, and of course of extreme importance, making sure that we look at primary care capacity and outcomes as part of that, and finally doing all of that working collaboratively across the system. So all the things that we'd expect to be doing for the second half of the year. The paper goes on to talk about the timetable. Given the timing of the governing body, quite a lot of the submissions have already been made to NHS England and Improvement, and we're waiting feedback on those. But I'll hand over to my director colleagues. I think Richard is going to go first to talk about narrative, and I'll come back at the end to talk about the budget.
Thank you, Jane. So my bit's quite short, so just building on what Jane's just said, section 4. You'll recall that earlier in the year, for the first half of the year, we did put in quite a comprehensive narrative. I think it was about 50 to 60 pages in the end, which went through those 6 key features of the national plan. For the second half of the financial year, thankfully, they've narrowed it down to focus on 4 areas, which is listed in section 4.2. So continuing to support the health and well-being of staff, and further action on recruitment and retention, which is backed up with a clear workforce plan, which I'm sure Amanda can comment on if there's any questions. The second is restoring full operation of all cancer services. So that's effectively the ongoing planning related to the constitutional standards, such as 2-week waits and 62-day performance. The third is restoring and increasing access to primary care, which I'm sure Kate might comment on later on in terms of the challenges and opportunities afforded through that. And then finally, and it links back to the previous item that Paul just given the headlines on, transforming community service and improving discharge. So this is particularly around operational planning in terms of demand hitting our services, but also some of the particular new things that NHSE are asking for related to the National Ageing Well programme. So the standards around 2-hour response to community urgent need. So that's our early intervention team, EIT model, and our discharge to assess work in West Suffolk. So we've been able to describe, I think, quite well under each of those 4 sections the work underway within our system. and as I say, it builds on the first 6 months. We're also expecting to get further planning guidance. I heard yesterday it may be before Christmas Eve, which is a joy. So we may get it the week before, which I'm sure everyone will be delighted to see. So I'll make sure that's circulated once we get it. But that will give us a further opportunity to develop a further narrative for the next financial year related to all the different national priorities. I'll hand over to Paul.
Thank you, Richard. If I can talk a little bit about the winter plan, and of course, I think, Richard, in your introduction, you alluded that essentially we have not stopped planning. So actually calling it a winter plan is a bit of a misdemeanor in many ways, but we do know that we are likely to have quite a difficult time over this seasonal period. So essentially that means we've had to plan quite actively in terms of how we are likely to cope, I guess. And it hasn't escaped people's notice sort of nationally what the picture is at the moment in terms of the pressures on the NHS and in particular some of our acute providers, and needless to say primary carers as well. And I think it's probably worth sort of teasing out a little bit why that is. And in part, it's because of COVID and flu. COVID numbers, we have a number of patients in our hospitals at the moment that causes operational pressures. Whilst COVID numbers appear to be reducing slightly, we just simply don't know whether they'd like to spike or whether, as Christopher's alluded to earlier on, we may end up in a slightly different place depending on that pans out. So again, important consideration together with, of course, the active immunization plans that we have both for flu and COVID, which we are doing very well as a system to try and counter some of those effects. Clearly, workforce is a huge challenge. And again, you heard from Kate earlier on that we've got plans, but workforce sit really well behind some of the assumptions. We know we have some very tired staff. We know that we are being asked to do more than we used to, even sort of the post-COVID, or not post-COVID, but essentially trying to come out of the COVID pandemic. And we also know that we're now seeing rising demands. So whilst activity is not necessarily higher than it was, say, in 2019, it is approaching the same level in 2019. And at the same time, there is a conversation about elective recovery and doing more recovery waiting list and going back to face-to-face, all those conversations. So it feels very difficult because we are trying to deliver an awful lot during what is typically known as quite a difficult period of the year. So essentially, the way we will sort of approach it will fit into a number of categories or approaches. So broadly, think about the intelligence that we have. So do we understand what the flu is likely to do? Do we understand what COVID is likely to do? What do we think the numbers of COVID patients we might have during that period? And essentially, how are we doing on our discharge planning in terms of our measurements, our too early crisis response, etc. And essentially, that leads us then to a big piece of work around demand capacity modelling. So all the trusts behind all of this work have done their own demand capacity modelling to understand seasonally and by month, essentially, what the picture is going to be like in terms of patient flow and the impact and the innovation we need to undertake to try and support and minimise the impact that the pressures are likely to have. At the same time, we're having conversations around, admission avoidance. How do we reduce our ambulances in terms of arrival? And we've got a number of plans in place to do some of that. At the same time, we're investing in other services like PPGIE 111 services and also patient transport, etc., to make sure we have the capacity actually to meet any increase in demands. I think Kate early on touched on the fact that we're investing heavily on additional community beds and other community services to try and manage and support and improve flow as we move forward. The other thing I would point out is whilst the system itself is experiencing some significant pressures, in comparative terms across the region, we are doing well, and that's probably an understatement. We've been at sort of level 3 now quite consistently, whilst other systems have been at level 4 in terms of their pressure. So again, some wider conversation across the region how we can sort of work at a regional level to try and meet some of those pressures and challenges. And lastly, what is not in the paper, which actually is an important point. For those of you who've seen some of the press around Cornwall and what have you, there is always a risk that actually we go into sort of a significant pressure territory, i.e. EPRR response. And again, sitting alongside is some work around EPRR and how we might choose to respond to any emergencies. And the way we've sort of done that is by maintaining our tactical structure that we did through COVID. And actually on a weekly basis, we meet and review the pressures, review what our next actions, and move quite swiftly to try and avert any problems, which is in part why we are doing pretty well in comparative terms to other maybe sort of regional colleagues. So I'll pause there. It's an important preparation really for a difficult period. Happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Kate.
Not a question, it's just a point of note. I think you can see from the documentation just the enormous amount of work that's gone in, and I think we do need to acknowledge that. It's a very difficult time at the moment with lots of competing priorities, and even just the size of the font in the document illustrates just the volume of content that's in there. So I think it's just worth noting.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Katie. If I can just come back to that, and Christopher, behind each of those lines essentially are quite extensive plans that absolutely detail exactly what we're doing. So again, I don't think the document could have been uploaded. It's so big.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair, shall I now come in to finish off the paper?
Yes, well, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more on the activity and performance trajectories before I move into the budget.
Yeah, I can do. So essentially, the data that you've got is an expression of what the planning guidance are. So when we've been asked to recover cancer, which is part of the narrative, the actual sort of numbers detailed by if you want HRG by patient groups, how we will get there. When the challenges around reducing 104-week waits, for example, that maps out in terms of activity figures, in terms of how we will get there and the trajectory we're likely to meet. Similarly, with the workforce plans, there are clearly some aspiration in terms of what our work plans need to look like in terms of target recruitment, etc. And again, those figures are an expression of that. So essentially, what that would translate into is that we've set up our own trajectory through which we will have regional conversations as to where are we against the plans you've put in. So essentially, it translates the narrative into figures, and against which essentially region will be looking at it to say, are you on track or aren't you on track? Let's have a conversation.
Thank you. And if there are no questions on that element for Paul, I'll move on to conclude the paper. I can't see any hands, Chair, so I'll move on.
I think not. On you go.
Okay, so the final part of the paper is the financial implications of all that we have discussed, and what we have done is pull together Appendix C, which starts with the system and then goes into the specifics about West Suffolk CCG. So probably the most useful bit in terms of understanding the financial context is in the background slide. I won't go into a lot of detail because I know the Finance Committee went through it a couple of weeks ago, but effectively we're seeing a rollover of resources from the first half of the year into the second half of the year with a few changes. We've been funded for the
not again.
NHS partners in the system, and an additional bit of funding for urgent care capacity, which we've used towards our winter plans, but with some reductions in the amount of COVID funding that we received, and some increased efficiency, which reduces the overall envelope. Overall, you'll see on the second slide that what that does is that translates into the amount of money that we're talking about, and effectively for the first half of the year, we when you compare like with like and take out non-recurrent elements such as the pay award, which only appear in the second half, there's a small reduction of about 6.6 million between the two on a like-for-like basis. But overall, for Suffolk and North East Essex, for our NHS services, we are due to receive over £1.8 billion for the whole of the financial year, and I think it's just worth noting that because it is such a substantial sum of money. So within the CCGs and working with partners, we've been through an exercise which we talked through in detail at Finance Committee about distributing the various elements. They're set out in the paper around COVID allocations, lost income, how the system efficiency was allocated, and in particular the capacity funding, the money that we're calling the winter monies, how the process that Paul described and the plans that are set out in the winter plan, the financial implications of those by organisation are set out in page 6 of the appendix. But that's pretty much it for the system overall. As it says on the background slide, well, the requirement for NHS organisations is to treat both parts of the year together, treat it as a whole, as you'd expect us to do, and for NHS organisations to put in a break-even plan across the full year. And I'm pleased to say that for all organisations within our system control total, other than the Ambulance Trust, we've been in a position to do that. The Ambulance Trust has currently got a deficit plan in line with a lot of ambulance trusts across the country and is working closely with region on the implications of that. So moving into West Suffolk CCG financial plan, we do have, the governing body does have a formal requirement to sign off the budget, hence there's a detailed budget paper within sheet within this appendix, but this is the same as came to the Financial Performance Committee, where we went through all of the individual cost pressures and efficiencies that make up the budget that are set out in the paper. So I'm not going to go through all of those, just to say that finances are extremely tight for CCGs in the emergency financial regime that we're currently working in, because they're based on a rollover of spend at a particular time. So there's no contingency funding that we would normally have that built in, and it does mean that our ability to absorb pressures has been quite tricky, and we've seen particularly pressures in continuing healthcare and prescribing, more so in the east of our patch than in the west on this occasion, that have caused significant pressures. So we are working, the 3 CCGs that make up Suffolk and North East Essex are working together to deliver a balanced position across the whole of the year. And one of the ways that we are looking to do that is that we're pooling the COVID resources across the 3 CCGs and hosting that via Ipswich and East Suffolk CCG. Hopefully that will, with other measures that Ipswich and East Suffolk CCG are taking specifically to balance their books, that should enable us to be in a position to deliver financial balance across all 3. So I'll pause there, Chair, to see if there are any questions, but if we could approve the financial plan and budget as part of this item, I'd be grateful.
Right, so first of all then, are there any questions or points for discussion raised on that last part of this paper? I think that's a no. So are we happy to approve the plan as currently presented officially as the board? Yep, everybody, thank you very much indeed. All right, there we go. So we now have the finance, performance and scrutiny section, which we will begin. We take a break somewhere in the middle, about 11. Richard, would you like to lead us, please?
I will delegate that leadership to Paul, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, if I can kick us off, Christopher. So I think if I can just say that the last sort of couple of months really have been focused really on 2 main areas, essentially elective recovery, which feeds into the RTT conversation, which is very much part of the documents, cancer recovery, etc. And also the second element of that has been emergency care and winter planning in particular. So I think if I can just say a few words around sort of elective recovery. And in a sense, whilst we're not where we would like to be, I think there are some positive news. Some recent publications in HHA puts us as the 4th best performance sort of nationally in terms of our activity related performance, which is great, but clearly not where we need to get to ultimately, and that's compared to 2019 sort of to the benchmark. Just to tease out a little bit and put a bit of context in terms of performance of what the regional national ask is from the system, and there are probably sort of 3-4 areas that we are being asked to deliver on in H2, i.e. second half of the year. One is essentially to maintain our emergency elective activity, what we call P1 and P2 urgent surgery. Secondly, is to recover our cancer trajectories by the end of March. essentially reduced and negate any 104-week waits that we currently have. And it's just fair to say that at the moment our main areas of challenge are orthopedics and gynecology and some oral maxillofacial surgery, which is part of a regional sort of national conversation at the moment. So just linking back to the previous item, we've sort of projected we probably would still have about 259 patients waiting over 104-week in the system by the end of March. But of course, we want to go further, and we're currently having some conversation how we might achieve that. The two other quick things are around trying to maintain our over 52-week wait patients, and the other thing is to try and contain the waiting list, which of course, until you switch on additional capacity, will carry on growing, particularly in certain specialities. In terms of maintaining our activity, I mentioned earlier on we were doing well sort of nationally, and we have been able to maintain a fairly high level of activity across the board. I think from memory about 86 to 87% for our outpatients, roughly about sort of 80+% around our elective, although in October we did see a dip because some of the system pressures that we are experiencing. Daycare's up at 90%, and our diagnostic, which are MRI, endoscopies and CT scan, well above 100% in terms of our performance. So some really good news stories within that, which ultimately feeds into improved performance over time. The other quick thing to say, and some really sort of, I suppose, sort of useful feedback is we are seeing an increasing amount of mutual collaboration across the system. So again, surgeons are operating, in SNF, and there was what very first list happening on the 18th of November. Clearly, some patient engagement and patient choice conversation are really quite important in that space. But again, some really good mutual work together, and that translates into gynecology, dermatology, ENT, and ophthalmology. So again, some really good engagement at system to see what we can do to address some of the long waiters and particularly areas of specialism which are particularly challenged. So again, I sort of stop there on elective. I think we're doing well, but we need to do better, and we need to start thinking about future strategies in the future as we move forward into next year. But we are planning to fulfill the ask in terms of the planning guidance for the second half of the year. Just quickly touching on urgent care, I'm not going to say very much because we've sort of covered it in terms of the winter planning. We are under fair amount of significant pressures. I want to give the details of things we're currently doing, but I would point to the ambulance delays that are starting to filter through the PR document, and we were written to nationally, regionally to try and eradicate delays, because clearly that causes some issues with patients having to wait an excessive long amount of time for ambulance to get to the patient and get into the hospital. I would say that as a system, we're doing relatively well compared to other regional colleagues, but any delay is one delay too many, and that's part of an active conversation how we can do that and work more smartly to avoid those delays moving forward. Lisa may want to say something from a quality point of view around that particular element, but I think it's probably worth pointing out that's probably one of our risks in a system. So I'll stop there and happy to try and answer any questions. Christopher.
Thank you. Any questions for Paul at this stage? Thank you. Your turn, Lisa.
Thank you. So I'm going to depart from tradition and just give an overview of where I think the main quality risks are across all our providers, because I think it's a very similar theme and similar things that for all of our providers. And I think we've talked about it already quite a lot, but it is around our workforce and the number of patients that need care and treatment, and they are inextricably linked. I think what we are seeing is as our workforce, as the number of patients that require care and treatment increase, and we do all the great stuff that Paul's talked about around our elective recovery, we see more and more demands on our workforce, and that has a real impact on our workforce, who feel at some times unable to deliver the standard of care that they want to be able to deliver, which is resulting in increased sickness levels, increased numbers of people leaving a number of our professions, which is then having an impact on the remaining workforce and their ability to deliver services. So we're seeing this really acutely in the ambulance trust. And obviously the ambulance trust is part of a system, so we're seeing increased incidents that are being reported due to delays in reaching the patient. So sometimes some really significant delays of 3 hours when they should have responded within 15 minutes, and we're seeing the impact that is having sometimes catastrophic harm on patients, and then the impact that has on workforce. So it's a continuous cycle of the workforce issues that we have, and the number of patients that are in care and treatment. I think that's time we've got really clear plans and really clear ways of trying to support our workforce, trying to resolve some of the psychological distress that our workforce are experiencing. But I think ultimately the impact that we're seeing is sometimes on our patients, and I think that's probably is our biggest quality risk across the system.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Lisa? Okay, thank you. Strategy and transformation next.
Thank you, Christopher. Excuse me. So in terms of the programmes, just give you a brief headlines on each of them, if that's okay. So on the first one, Kate's given most of the main messages from the West Suffolk out of hospital elective programme as part of the West Suffolk update. So this is slide 366 in the pack. Just to point out a couple of areas again. So on ageing well, just to reinforce that we have had an allocation of funding for the financial year related to the Ageing Well programme. So this particularly relates to our care homes work, our proactive work in terms of our integrated neighbourhood teams, and our responsive work in terms of urgent response related to admission avoidance and discharge to assess. So there's a whole plan that's been developed and costed and has been agreed through the executive, but is being overseen by the Integrated Health and Care Board, which Kate and others chair. So lots of work happening in that space. The other two to point out is in relation to elective, building on Paul's earlier points. We've now got well underway both the Integrated Care System eye care programme and the Integrated Care System musculoskeletal or programme of work. So that's building on where does it make sense to do work once across the ICS. So particularly Paul alluded to demand and capacity modelling across the ICS for those areas of work. Also some of the digital innovation things that we're working on, and also workforce planning. So there's been particular value, I think, with bringing people together around those two particular areas, and they are national NHS England mandated areas that we need to be working on at scale. So work underway there. On virtual consultations, it's almost become business as usual within the trust now in terms of the work ongoing to try and maintain that key standard of 25% of outpatient attendances done virtually. As of October, the trust was sitting at just shy of 25% for news and 24% for follow-up, so doing relatively well, but just slightly below target. If I move on to the next programmes, which is at slide 373 onwards, again, just to pick out a couple. So on neuro rehabilitation, just to alert the board that we've now got work underway across the integrated care system related to what we need, future-proofing the current neuro rehab capacity we've got. So as it stands, we've got almost a block arrangement with a provider which runs out. We've just extended it slightly, and also then we end up spot purchasing as and when required. We're in the process of agreeing through the ICS Neuro Rehab Board, which has got clinical and managerial representation from each of the acutes and community partners, exactly what that model needs to look like to then likely go out to a procurement in the near term next year. On the cancer work, just to pick out some headlines, we've agreed now the funding for the Macmillan Cancer Navigators in West Suffolk until March 2023. We need to put it on an absolutely firmer footing longer term, but at this stage, we've got agreement until March 23 through a combination of West Suffolk Foundation Trust and the existing ICS cancer budget. And then we've also got a patient engagement co-production event. I think it was either last week or into this week, which is looking at going into next year, how we can build on the existing co-production work we've got for the cancer programme and take it to the next level. On the children's programme, starting at slide 378, again, just to pick out some headlines. So we were about to start in January a piece of work across Suffolk, so including Waveney and Ipswich and East, on developing a 3-year children's strategic framework, which would kind of give the infrastructure or the mechanism to then take forward some of the transformation work at place and at county level, much more clear on some of the governance that will be around that. It doesn't mean that the areas of work we've already got underway aren't going to happen, but it's particularly a joint piece of work with Suffolk County Council to look at what further opportunities there might be to integrate. Really pleased that in terms of neurodevelopmental, we're going to be soft launching the new model in January, and we're proposing to bring something back to the clinical executive in February around all things neurodevelopmental. It links back to Lisa's previous report in the meeting around the SEND inspection and some of the particular challenges that came out of that related to neuro. So we're very much now have all of the 7 support services provided by our voluntary care and social enterprise partners either underway or with a planned launch date. We've now commissioned Bernardo's to provide the coordination function for neurodevelopmental, and we've also got our providers, both West Suffolk Foundation Trust and Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, to jointly now provide every week triage panels for all young people who come through. So there's a joint triage rather than at the moment people being pigeonholed into a particular pathway, and then there'll be a lead professional appointed related to that child or young person. And then just on the mental health programme, we've also been really successful, particularly in the West Suffolk, in terms of the recruitment. This is slide 385 of the mental health practitioners. So we're nearly at full recruitment in the West, which is brilliant news. I know there's more work to do to actually work through exactly what those roles will entail. But as it stands, of the 12 roles within West Suffolk, we've got 2 vacancies. So that's 10 either in post or due to start, which is great news. And on serious mental illness, the health checks, we're doing relatively well in the West at just shy of 38% at Q2, which again is good news against that standard of 60. More work to do, but starting to make real progress there. And then just to finish on confirming the procurement is now underway, as Paul said, for the crisis safe havens, which is a key part of our future mental health model. And I'll leave it there.
Should I take over?
Christopher. I don't know if Christopher's so thrilled.
I think Christopher's mouth.
Is now joining.
So I'll just say a few words about primary care. Just
over
quickly.
To you. I'll hand over to Kate.
Thank you. We've got an unrefreshed set of data in the paper. So as Lisa did, I think I'm going to go off plan slightly and just talk more broadly. We've touched on a few bits already. And as always, when we talk about sort of winter and pressures, very often our conversation is very hospital centric and care centric. And we've also done a mirroring piece of work looking from a primary care perspective, because we are, as with the wider system, in an unprecedented territory, really, in terms of level of activity, level of pressure, and actually in terms of combined fatigue. And concerns around the overarching well-being of the workforce. So I think it's important to A, note that, but B, also when we're talking about what we're doing to try and help some of that, there's been a pot of funding that we've put a plan in for that has looked at working with our clinical directors and our LMC to pull together a menu of options, really, of schemes that can help to build a little bit more capacity or resilience into primary care. So they have been things that are just getting up and running. They're not necessarily in train yet, but looking at additional home visiting services, looking at wound clinics being held over the weekend, looking at more support over from a wellbeing perspective, providing IT for the additional responsibilities, the R's roles that are in place, but hadn't, some of the infrastructure around them wasn't allowing them to operate to their full potential. Looking at increasing one of our favourite topics, slots within GP Plus, and targeting them slightly more where they're not being utilised or the access hasn't been successful. I can see Godfrey on my screen. Looking at locums where possible, and looking at doctors who might be able to support with admin and putting additional admin into practices. These all sound like quite pedestrian things, but I think because of the volume and the heat that the system is running at the moment in primary care, keeping all of those plates spinning has meant that actually there's a significant ask on the kind of back office organisational piece, as well as the front of house clinical staff requirements. And the other piece to mention is we've got a slightly shifting picture around our vaccination programmes, just to the backdrop that I've just given the detail around primary care at the moment, and also the way we're operating kind of as a system and a community now. We're in a different place on vaccination provisions. So we're looking at a much more mixed model, working with community pharmacists, working with pop-up clinics, exploring additional vaccination centre capacity and potential site locations, as well as continue with certain areas of the primary care delivery being ongoing in various patches. But it is a different model, which is growing almost day by day. But just to acknowledge that juggling the vaccination programmes, flu and COVID-19, in addition to an enhanced level of activity in primary care, has put additional stress on the system as well. I think it's important to note that. So that's probably it. I mean, I can hear Christopher's back online now.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Any questions for Kate? Okay, thank you. In which case, we will go on to finance.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So included in the pack is a statement of about month 7 reports. We would normally have brought the month 7 report to the governing body. Because we are in the process of setting up the plans for the second half of the year, there is no formal month 7 reporting. What should have been in the pack was a copy of the month 6. Don't quite know how that disappeared between the draft and the actual, but it came to the Clinical Scrutiny Committee. So just to update the board verbally, that when we finished month 6, we were showing a break-even position for the CCGs, which is what we anticipate to continue for the remainder of the year. That was after anticipating receipt of hospital discharge funding, which comes from a separate national source. So hopefully normal financial reporting will resume by the next governing body.
Thank you. Any questions on that? I think not. Okay. Shall we take a break there? We've been sat for nearly 2 hours. If we would reconvene at 11:15 prompt, please. The recording, I would remind you, continues, and therefore please put your cameras off and mute yourselves. But do all come back at 11:15. Right, welcome back, everybody. We got to the... Oh, I'm on echo now. Try dropping off the phone.
Is now exiting.
Right, we got as far, we've done item 13 completely. So we'll start with item 14, the governing body assurance framework. Amanda.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So here we have the November updated risk assurance framework. And since our last review a month ago, we have actually added a new risk referring to system resilience, which I think has been reflective on the discussions that we've had thus far. In addition to adding that risk, we have updated the workforce risk, which will probably be no surprise to any of us. And that really is to be reflective of how the system currently is with its workforce and the ongoing workforce pressures. And although it is obviously a real issue and a concern for us within our system, it's something that I think is happening up and down the country. And as we saw in the earlier paper where we were talking about the 21-22 plan, you'll have seen in Annex A, there are something like 35 plus programmes of work actively being worked on by the People Board and the wider system at the moment to underpin all things workforce. Keeping with our risk register, the ICS white paper work is moving in the right direction. And as we heard at a recent meeting, we are continuing to do everything that we can in terms of the CCG closure. We have a lot of activity currently ongoing with regards to the recruitment of our executive team, and we'll be imminently starting the process for our non-executive recruitment in the coming weeks. And we are envisaging that interviews will take place for all of those roles in January as we move forward. Moving towards the local risk registers, Chair, I wanted to point out one of the risks pertaining to corporate services, and that's regarding estates generally. And I wanted to flag it because in light of a comment earlier made by Kate in terms of the R's and the challenges it presents, I wanted to just flag to governing body that the estate capacity and ongoing challenges in regard to need is something that we are going to be taking forward at the ICS board in January, because it is a real challenge. We have limited resource to expand primary care estate. And we concluded the other day that really we need to have a meaningful system conversation with wider partners so that we're all on the same page with regards to current and future estate risks. And I propose that once that conversation has happened in January, that I either update the governing body and or the clinical executive with regards to next steps. Now, I will pause there, Chair, but I'm sure director colleagues may want to add any update pertaining to their risks. For example, Paul, did you want to add anything?
No, I think we've well trailed the challenges that we have around resilience and the plans that we've got in place. So I'm happy with that. Thank you. Thank
you, Paul. Are there any other director colleagues that wanted to elaborate on any of their current risks? No? Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any comments, Jeff?
Not from me, thank you. No, I've been through the register. It seems to have been all the issues seem to have been covered off and also addressed this morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So now on to the declarations of interest. I think Amanda, still with you.
Yep. Grand. Thank you very much, Chair. So here is our updated report.
I'm off again.
To date register that we have, and I think it's for no, but I would also add a plea, please, for any members that have yet to update, can you please do so and turn to Joe for a complete record, which we obviously do publish on our website. That was really all I wanted to say on that matter.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I'm sure everybody is about to do what they should have if they haven't done it at the time.
Thank you.
Okay, still with you, Amanda, then, the health and safety update.
Thank you very much. So this is one of our typical reports. The committee last met at the end of October, and we continue to ensure that all of our working officers have safe COVID in place, so our risk assessments are duly updated and published accordingly. And as you would imagine, home working is a key feature of the meeting now and going forward, and we'll be obviously making sure that home working is reflected in our HR policies as we move forward to April and the ICB. So that was really all I wanted to share, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay. Then the minutes of the various subcommittees. Jeff, you usually lead us on these.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. As you see, there's a number of minutes attached to the agenda, and I think unless any of the chairs want to comment on any of their committees, then I would ask the governing body to endorse the minutes as presented. Thank you.
And as read. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any comments, questions? No. Okay, thank you very much. Right. That takes us to the end of this meeting. The date and time of the next meeting is as shown, 26th of January. Questions from the public. We do have one question from the public, which I will read out for you in a moment when I get to it. So this question is from Matt Tracy, and the question is regarding the Haverhill Health Centre on Camps Road. Where have the community health services based there been relocated, and are any service users having to travel out of town for them? Now, we could have deferred this answer to the providers because it's strictly a provider question, but I suspect that the intelligence around this meeting probably knows the answer to that.
So, Christopher, I can say a few words if I may.
Might know something.
Well, Firas, actually, Firas, if you want to go first, I'm happy to summarize afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. Probably I'll just say why I know really. West Suffolk Hospital now looking into relocating all the services, the community services to Astower View, the old health centre, which we're not using at the minute. And there's some work now going on very quickly, just taking over the lease really for that building and moving the service quickly there. There's some service, to my knowledge, being moved to Abbeycroft Health Centre, just temporary to provide some service. I think the midwife as well, they're working from there. And the district nurses, sometimes they share the building with us just to provide some service locally, really. So I don't think any of the service are affected, and the patient doesn't need to go anywhere as far as I know. Thank you.
Thank you. That accords with my intelligence. Does it accord with yours, Paul?
Yeah, it does. The only thing I was going to add is clearly we've taken a bit of a leadership role as a CCG to try and coordinate all the tenants' conversation to make sure we can come up with some logical and pragmatic solutions to this. The final solution, as far as I know, has not been settled on, but that's an active conversation. I think there was a meeting yesterday, which I haven't caught up, which actually probably provide more detail. But essentially, the idea is that we keep the services locally, which is actually the focus of this conversation.
Thank you. Kate, do you want to add?
So I think everyone's confirmed my bit of knowledge, and actually there's been some really good conversations about how we work with our local stakeholders to, and especially the midwives going into the lovely wellbeing suite at Abbeycroft Leisure. I think has been a nice environment for the women to be able to access services from. I think there are some questions that I'll take away to have locally, or Paul and I will, about the kind of services provided by Adam Brooks. as well to make sure that they're following that same principle of keeping their provision within the town.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, that brings us, that was the only question, and that brings us to the end of the meeting, and thank you very much for all your inputs. I do propose that we move on without further break to the part 2. Jo, is that acceptable?
Yep, if you could do it on the other link though.
Oh yes, we'll all hop over, don't worry.